They're there to be used, aren't they?
They are, exactly. So yeah, heading back to Sri Lanka for a couple of weeks.
Very
That'll
nice.
be nice. Not been back for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So again with sort of mum and dad and an uncle. No one's getting younger, are they? So it'd be quite nice to catch some winter sun.
Sounds ideal. Yeah.
Jealous.
Like I said, I'll be able to not be able to go anywhere then after that. So, but I must become better at using these bank holiday weekends for trips. Better, you know. The bank holidays come along, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would have been a good idea to kind of take some holiday then. But yeah, I need to put that into my diary to kind of be more strategic.
It's too easy, Andrew, to lose your holiday, mate. It's too easy, especially
Well,
at the moment. There's
Yeah.
so much change going on. It's beyond belief.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you got to book something, someone might be on strike and you can't get there or get out or any of those things.
My daughter the other day said to me, she said, "Daddy, if I want a pay rise, all I've got to do is go on strike, haven't I?" And I was just like, "She's only 7." She said to me, "So you get a pay rise and you get to go on strike, so I'm going to go on strike." I was just like, so funny, crack me up. Because kids see it in a completely innocent way, don't they? She's like, "Is that how it works? You just go on strike and you get pay rises." It's like, it's brilliant.
Just get it
Innocent
embedded into
children.
public civil service or public sector. That's the kind of small script that she needs to learn.
Yeah, funny. It's funny. Got to laugh.
Richard, you mentioned there's a gentleman who may be able to do it because, yeah, I don't think we've met for a while now, actually, to be fair. And obviously over the Christmas New Year, things are always in flux. But George is on site. I think you mentioned Richard. So, but it'll be interesting to hear. I think there was another gentleman from Workstream One who you thought would be able to give some sort of a presentation. Was that correct?
Well, it's Paul.
Yeah.
Hi, Paul.
Sorry, Andrew, I haven't seen you all for a while. I think you're right. I don't think you've met up for a long while. I think all it was I sit in a few other different things, don't I, as well? One of the things I sit on is the process group for the passive fire knowledge group. So there's some good work there. And it's just a case of we had a bit of a chat about it in working, session 1 with Andrew, Martin Aid and the rest of the guys there, just about how process flow looks from everyone's point of view. And I think it's always good to get everyone's view on it, because this stuff's going to get more and more presented and released. We did it at Build Expo as well, so it'd be good to see where we've looked at it here in relation to what you're doing, because the more inputs you get, the better it just helps change the flavour of whatever cocktail you're making. I suppose you could say it that way. So yeah, it'd be good to get your insights onto
And also,
how we kind of looked at it.
I think we're looking at having some ongoing work on that. So I think the idea is that if there's a designer with an M&E type bent, to actually get them on board with the actual work that's going to be moving on forward. But Paul knows more about that than I do. I don't understand it, as you know.
Yeah, but once I go through it, I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I think the problem is, it's like I think everyone's kind of thinks construction's easier than, say, doing nuclear or pharmaceutical. It's not. It's complex, bloody complex. And when you look at your key stakeholders, who's the knowledge holder for each part of it, you can see in the way we've kind of transposed it where the kind of issue occurs. So different way of looking at it. So I think you'll enjoy it. I think it's just when everyone's there, we'll crack on with it if you want, however you want to do it, Andrew.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Just want to say, Jared, thanks for the feedback on the questions. What will be useful, I'll have a catch up with George in terms of, or you may know, Richard, whether those questions have sort of been passed on to the other working groups, because obviously there are questions to other procurement teams and the client teams, etc.
Partially, but not. I think not formally enough. Yeah, I think we need to. Tail end of last year, the last few months, there was a lot of focus on like with the fire safety, with several of the work groups, particularly with that deadline on the 23rd. Just everything kind of got thrown into that. So it needs to. They absolutely need to be more formally adopted as something to move forward, without any question, and that's on the agenda to do that.
No, that's fine. Because I think the it's kind of attacking you from two ends, because I think the work that you've been doing, Paul, is sort of looking at more the detailed level, but then making sure that, as I say, I think in Jarrett's comments about the client knowing what the right questions is, or the procurement and
Yeah.
understanding, because all these consultants, I guess, throw things at the clients. And they're like, yeah, fine, well, you're the expert, but they're not necessarily taking on board the required time periods for design or detailed design or procurement or review.
Absolutely.
So educating the client side continues to be a requirement, because they will just pass it on to the consultants, and everything just gets pushed back down. So and I think also now that we are getting into enacting things like the Building Safety Act is in play, it'd be nice to see how we're getting tender requests for resi schemes, and we're talking with some contractors, people like Waits and Bouygues, as we know, who are engaged, but some others aren't. So we're kind of getting to see real life requirements for this stuff, which can only help us if we share it. So we go, okay, actually, look, our clients are asking these things. What are your clients asking the same type of things, or not? So I think that will be an evolution as it's in the first bit of the year. But I think that's a general request for any feedback on those questions as and when people get it.
Absolutely.
And then Richard,
Yeah.
I guess there's the formal kind of asking and then sharing those questions
Absolutely.
in a different level.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, look, again, over to you, Paul. Thank you very much for sort of taking the lead on that.
Yeah, get this ready to go, and share my screen. Fingers crossed what comes up first of all. There you go. Calendar, that's good. Let's come down to this one. The problem when you've got too many things open, guys. Just 1 second. Is that the one? No. Keep coming down. So I had it
doing a
there.
lot of presentations.
I had it there 2 seconds ago, and it seems to have vanished. Give me 1 second. Hold on. Where's it gone? There we go. Sorry, yeah. So I think that there was two things, Andrew. And look, this isn't actually about detail, actually, which I think makes a change. And I see Paul White's on there as well. Hi, Paul. So look, what we did was there's a thing called the Passive Fire Knowledge Group. So we launched this at Build Expo this year, which is the ASFP, it's BISA. It's all basically it's all the tier one. Most of the tier one contractors have been involved in it. So I've been looking over process. So one of the big things was that we sort of presented there was about having a need for like a passive fire code of practice, a bit like in building services terms, you've got CIBSI Code M, which is how you manage commission management as a management process of commission, not how you do it. You have separate guides for how you do it, but how you manage it in behavioural with the various stages of REBA. So we come up with this and went through, and the little keys there came from George, which is around gateway. So George has seen this, but we've been trying to refine it and bring it back into the group because I need help with the BIM side of it. BIM being the key part of getting the asset stuff correct in relation to how this flow works. So don't pay too much attention to it. It's all about how you establish the shape and form of the building, how systems work in risk categories in relation to space, ratings, time, how they operate, and how you get to the point where you actually got like a register of all the different steel types in the building. Because
Sorry, Paul, just to jump in there, just for my knowledge, when you refer to the passive fire systems, so these are essentially things which don't have power or anything to them. These are just sort of fire stops and seals and things like that.
Yeah, I'll get onto it because there's active systems which are a bit more dynamic. You've got static passive fire, but then also you've got transient systems, right? So we broke it into 3 categories. You'll see it in a minute when I go through it all. But this covers all of it. So passive fire knowledge, because even if you take a fire door, it's still a passive system, but you can walk through it. So it's transient. Smoke extract is like dynamic, but it's passive in its first principle because it compartments, but it can open to extract. So we looked at it in a slightly different way to bring it into language, make it easier. So we kind of went for, don't worry too much about all this at the moment, because I think in time we'll get this issued out for a bit more, but there's a RACI that sits behind this as well. So when you talk about getting clients to understand who should do what, we're trying to tackle it as well, but at a very high level rather than going into the detail. So the biggest thing was breaking down. The next part of it was when you take, whether it's a fire door, a damper, whether it's a pipe seal, because these things are all different, whether it's a flue, a buzz bar, the only way to kind of understand how these things work in practice is to look at the fire risk type of the building, the space risk. And whether those systems are, as I said earlier, a fire door is transient because you can walk through it. And they can be dual swing, single swing, and they can have glass panels in them, whatever. You know, all different sized doors. You know, fire dampers are generally static. They shut. They smoke controls dynamic because it can open to extract. So we try to bring it into some different language about that's the operational types. Once you know that, you've got to assign that to that. Then you've got to look at how you get to the classification of those products, because this classification here is for a fire damper. But the fact is that there's other classification information or important information that sits behind it. Hence, where the BIM's so important, because then you got obviously the supporting construction side of it, which we all know has been half the battle, whether it's symmetrical, asymmetrical, or it's rigid, whatever type of wall construction has been used, whether it's standard or other. So this side of it, then you also got the installation and maintenance type. Unless you kind of consider all of those parts before you get to this point here in gateway one, there's a good chance that build or something's going to be wrong. So I think, as you said earlier yourself, it's about how we get clients back to a very diagrammatic, view where you can say, if you don't follow something like this, this is what the output is going to be to your project. So one of the things we said previously externally is that fire engineers generally, so don't get me wrong, don't shoot me down, should know the space risk and really should know the building type. And that should be the fire strategies. They're really the knowledge holders of that part. Not always all the space risk, especially should be the knowledge holders.
So is everyone other? I'm just struggling to hear a little bit. Should we turn our videos off just in case, if that's okay? No, I don't think it's you, Paul. It might just be a bandwidth issue. So I'll turn my video off. Maybe if everyone does that, just to see if that works. Anna.
Hi everyone. Apologies for being slightly late.
That's fine. We're just Paul's just sort of doing a presentation on the work they've been doing.
Thank you.
We're just going to turn cameras off just to reduce bandwidth. If that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Try that, Paul. See if that works. Rowan, can everyone go on mute, please? Start speaking, Paul. See if that works.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think it's my I think it's just my lead. You can still hear me, yeah?
I can, yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, so look, just for Anna's benefit, obviously, look, we think externally called the Passive Fire Knowledge Group. I've been looking after the process. Just really quickly for you, Anna, is that we try to get REBA aligned into such a way where you've got some very big, methods of going through passive fire knowledge cradle to grave. So we were just talking about shape and form of building, the risk category of space, your system operational types, and how you get to the point where you really need to have a classification register before you get to the gateway one, because otherwise you can't tell whether things are going to fit in the building. And there's case example at the back of this about how you see what the effect of not doing it is. If I just move forward quickly back to where we were, these are the 5 things that we were looking at, which is building safety type, space risk type, the operational side of the system, because fire doors are transient, dampers are static, smoke controls dynamic, same as sprinklers because they're performing a function. Every product's got different classifications by DOPs, but there's other information that sits behind this, which is more than this. To get these parts right, you need to understand the blade type of the damper and other things that come into it. And you also got wall types, which is your standard supporting, your flexibles and your brick and your block, or your non-standard, your asymmetricals. Then you've got the access type of installation and maintenance of products and how you get them installed, which is obviously a key thing to get this whole thing done before you get out of the planning stage. Not actually get it done fully drawn, but have the considerations for different products. So what we're saying here is that fire engineers are really the knowledge holder for the safety type of the building and generally the space. Some spaces are more complex they might need help with, but generally they should know it. You look at architecture, and don't shoot me down here, but most architects will understand the difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical and brick and block work walls. So they know that part. They're not fire engineers. They don't necessarily understand how smoke control systems work and classification of the products. They don't always understand how you install things because it's product specific. Same as a fire engineer doesn't know all of that. You look at building services consultants, they should generally know how things should function, but they don't always, because even with fire dampers and smoke control, just to make Paul White laugh, they don't always understand how those products work either. So they should be the knowledge holder, but not necessarily know all of it. They certainly don't know all of this part of it because they're not fire engineers. when you look at principal contractors, just to really make you laugh, we are passing all the risk down the line. So we are knowledge holders of generally none of it. So just to bear that in mind, that's what generally seems to happen. Specialist trades, so someone that does drywall should understand drywall. Someone that supplies dampers should understand how you install and access and do a damper. Sometimes do, sometimes don't, depends on the entity that's actually supplying it. Oh, sorry. And product supply, suppliers will understand how their products are classified, how the walls are classified. But again, they're not fire engineers. So the point of all this was originally was that no, it's not actually one duty holder that knows all of it. And this is why we're getting into a bit of a pickle. When you say as well yourself, Andrew, around procurement, it's quite key that if you're going to procure a product, you can't just go CDP and actually the supplier of that product or here is going to know how to do all of this, because they're not. That's where it's kind of going a bit wrong. So we sort of went, how do you break it out into an easier way of portraying it? So forget that one because that's an old slide. The big thing is that the key denominator is the wall. So if we take, I'm going to do a case example on a damper because it's the one we've spent the most effort on, to be quite frank with you. Though we're doing a bit of work on doors as well now, is that if you take a damper in consideration to a wall type, anything else that's in that wall must be considered at the same time as the damper because it affects the thickness and the type of the wall and the installation access to get that wall type right. So you can't set a wall unless you've set all of this in comparison to that wall. So when you look at procurement, we're seeing, drywall packages getting on board after maybe building services trades have done their coordination, and doors are getting procured before security packages are known. And it's all just a bit of a mess because, with doors, if you don't know what type of lock you're putting in the door, it's very hard to do a fire door with a mortise lock in it if you didn't know you needed a mortise lock in the first place. This is what we're kind of seeing. So it's all about getting this system approach kind of aligned up. So I'm going to do a bit of an example around this, so I think it'll make a bit more sense. So in the whole sort of process, when you look at it, there's a passive fire knowledge sort of code of practice and how you get things set out with a RACI, which I will share once we've got this kind of stuff into a bit of a better order, because we're going to get people's opinions and things on it. How you then do workbooks, which is what I'm going to show you next, and the bit I need some help from me, George, on is about getting this asset information right, because I don't know if you remember seeing these before. I did portray these in the Excel spreadsheets. They're enormous things and it's quite hard to get simplified. So this is all about simplifying it as well. So if I just quickly come down, I'm going to do an example on a fire damper. This is going to be the test of time. Now, hopefully I don't get heckled too much on how you select one of these things in, say, a protected space. So originally, right, this is the first part of this whole passive fire process that I'm going to use on it. I'm not going to go into this part because this is all about change as well. Is that I'm going to consider that damper as part of the wall system with everything else as well. So if I just come down quickly, I don't know if you everyone seen this before, but I went through and plotted out, and Paul's had it. I'm not trying to bring you into it, Paul, but Paul's had a look at this as well. Is how you select a fire damper based upon the space risk type, its functionality, the wall type, and how you look at access and maintenance. It was quite, for us probably as engineers, it's not too hard to follow, but it's quite difficult for people that really don't understand the inherency of the engineering. So we sort of said, this is where these come into it, because these are a representation of basically these channelings. So I'm going to try and make this look a bit simpler, right? So if I come down, that's what we said about earlier. So I'm going to start with this one, but I'm going to relate it back to that Reba process. And I'm going to go, first of all, let's look at a fire damper from the fire space risk and the building type risk. And I'm going to look at it based upon maybe something like a disabled refuge in a protected corridor with supply and extract air. So I want to establish the shape and form. That will come from previous projects. You should look at lessons learned that you've had on these kind of examples, but not as an individual architect, as a building services engineer, but as a team. Because everyone should really needs to get, and this is where it's all gone wrong, a bit of a collaboration on doing passive fire team reviews. Then we can look at the next part of it. So what does this look like in practice? So I said, look, all your different purpose groups. You've got 1As, which are your sort of multi-flat sort of developments, your dwelling houses, your duplexes, your prisons, your group 2As, your student blocks or hotels, your 2B offices. So I kind of put all the purpose groups across the top, then sort of went, well, someone's got to look at the shape and form, and you've got to look at the space risks. And this isn't all the space risks, but just to give some examples. So if you looked at, say, a disabled refuge inside a protected space, not in a firefighting shaft per se, but in a protected corridor somewhere, and your building's less than 900 meters squares, that drives you, your floor plates for firefighting shafts and things. Your height's this. It's a Group 2 building. So say it's a student block we're looking at. It's a refuge. It's got a fire and a smoke risk. That should be the thinking behind the fire engineering to get you to that point. Then you want to look at, how does this thing work in relation to it's operational type. So you go, well, let's look at how whatever's in there, how it's going to operate from a fire damper point of view and what the ratings and times are before we get onto the classification. So I said, well, this is probably the best way to portray it, because this is a protected lobby or corridor. I think everyone agrees with that, because it's, this is what you've got in there. It's got ventilation, so it's got a fire risk, a smoke risk. You can have a rating between 30 to 120 minutes, depending on where it is. But because it's a protected space, it's got to be activated automatically to the closed position by fire alarm activation. That's method 4 in building regulations for that type of damper. But the bit that gets kind of missed out is that system, and depending on the product you're buying, it could be an opposed blade damper, it could be a parallel damper, it could be a single blade damper. It can't be a curtain damper, because that can't be automatically driven. It's got one of these three sort of damper types that you're going to have, and it's obviously got a power alarm and fire alarm supply. So what does it look like in practice? That's kind of what I'd be choosing. I want something like that to make it work. It's all about process that should go on, but it's not going on, because I think we've kind of lost the collaboration in the industry to get it right, because of how procurement's driven maybe by clients. No disrespect to clients. It's like, we're going to do this CDP later on, but someone that does CDP can't be a fire engineer, an architect, everything at once. It's got to be done at a level before you prescribe it for them to describe the product that you're getting. So if I come on to the next bit, come on to the classification of how these things look. You then go, well, into the next bit about getting it classified. I want to establish all the classification types and I need to do a seal register as well for all of this stuff. That'd be for all products. So we're going to the next one. It's the same chart again, but I've just changed some language and added some more stuff into it. So I've kind of gone, if you think about it, it's protected corridor again. So it's ES. So I've got one of those little diagrams, just put the figure in. So it's now an ES damper. So it's going to be between 30 and 120 minutes. It's ADB method 4, which has to shut automatically on a fire alarm activation because of the smoke risk. I've still chosen that blade type. Well, these are really important just to get into it, because these kind of blades might give you a 70% free air. That might give you 50 or 60% free air. That might give you 50% free area. So if you've based your airflow in engineering on a fusible link, your duct's going to be 50% too small. And we see this a lot, because no one considers actually the blade type's got to be defined as one of the parameters before you go into CDP, so you know your Part L calculations right for fan power. All dampers will be inside to out tested. This one's on a wall, so I'm going to go if it's a vertical installation. There's a little diagram down there to tell you what it actually is. That's a VE damper for the wall that way. And the cycling in dampers can be up to C10,000. I think that's right, Paul, isn't it? Dampers you can still do up to C10,000. You corrected me previously on that, I think. So then you've got to look at this now in comparison, because you've set out what that product basically is, but you need to set it out in comparison to the type of wall you're looking at. So you come down and you go, well, if I'm putting it in a block work or a drywall, what am I looking at? Well, you've got two types of support and constructions. We know we've all been through this. You've got rigid block, or you've got symmetrical EN520 bolts. That's what you've got. So anything above that is classed as other. So let's look at how this looks in practice, because you want to establish how the construction is compatible with it. So these are all the different types of damper blades that exist. So damper types that exist on the market. There is away from wall, but I've not included it because it includes fire rated ducts. I've ignored it. So these are the ones that I know kind of exist on the wall. And thanks for that, Paul, because I've included it now, as you rightly see. Reverse deflection heads, cleats, plastered in. So I've got a product range, and I'm selecting the damper as a building services consultant. I've got a wall configuration of what's compatible with an architect. So what I'm making this simpler is to say, well, I know what that is because it's a protected space, and I've got that bit figured out. But I maybe want to use a flange damper, because that might be made by someone like, actually make these. I want to use one of these. I know it's compatible with a symmetrical wall. Anything else above this is classed as other. You need to make sure it's been tested with it. But then the thickness, you just need to check the DOP of the manufacturer, the minimum thickness that's been used in their test to set that into the wall. So it might be 122 mil. it might be 100 mil, but you need to check with the manufacturer what that is. It's giving you a method of going through it, but you know the seal type on these, the passive seal types, are in 520 and mineral wool. So as I said before, like this word on fire stopping, that's not fire stopping, because fire stopping is generally part 3, which is pipes. This isn't fire stopping. This is a drywall detail. So who's got the relative competence to do that? Isn't necessarily someone that does pipework bats, because it doesn't involve bats. That's sand and cement. That's batter mastics. There might be some crossover with a passive fire company that can do that one, but they've all got different seal types. This is how they all kind of work. So you've got a method there of selecting. Then you've got to look at how you do the installation, the access of it, because if you don't look at this is where we're seeing it going horribly wrong, is that you need to allow the space. And this is how I kind of worked it out. So I know what that is. I know the blade, I know the damper type. I've gone for that type of blades. I know what your pressure drop is. I know it's VE in the wall. I know it's symmetrical, but I still need to consider it with all the other components that go into the wall, because that's just one component in isolation. Not forgetting doors are complex, because you might have part M requirements. It might be powered, might have lower pull forces. You might have security on there. It could be Z&L brackets at the top. It could be a mortise red lock. That has to be compatible with the wall thickness as well and the wall types. All these things have got to be checked as a system for the wall that they go in. So if you've got one wall on an office floor and it's got doors glazing in it, it's got flues in it, fire rated ducts and dampers, you can't just do this exercise about running the same exercise for all of these, all the components that go into it, because you've got to get that to suit all of these, not these to suit that, because they'll all be different. Then you've got your seal type, then you've got your access requirements. So any seal that you've got for a damper, a duct, anything like that, you still need access both sides, because all seals need access both sides. You can't do them from one side. It just doesn't exist. So if you've got a symmetrical wall in there, you still need to get in to fix the wall. If you've got a shaft wall, and this is tested in shaft wall, the seal still needs access both sides. And if you're doing that seal as a passive fire company or someone that's doing the damper, you need 500 to 600 mil of space. So you can't just ignore that, unfortunately. It's there. But also you need access for cleaning for the ones at the bottom, ones at the side, your TR19 requirements. I think that's right, Paul, access both sides, yeah? Thumbs up. But again, the wall requirement itself has still got its own, because don't forget the wall, which is there, has still got its own requirement, which has got to be compatible with these as well. So the minimum distance for this from the top might be 75 mil in the test stand, so they can test things properly. But the wall, if it's got a 25 mil deflection head, might need 250 mil of drywall build up before you can put the damper into it. And that's the reality of how this kind of shows things appropriately about how you do it. So you can kind of see it all there in visual. Hello? So I thought someone was talking then. So if you look at it all, that's how you got to that classification number at the bottom, by going through that process. And this is how we've kind of tried to portray it. We're going to present this a bit more as time goes on. But obviously, once you've done that, the big next step for me is to get this bit right, which is the asset information, because all of these different things need to be recorded in the asset. Some things are going to be geometry, some things are going to be like PDF held, like the test results or the O&M manual for the product. That's the next bit I've got to get done with Jules. Then obviously I've got a process of builders work. There's a way of doing your different builders work schedules. The big thing is you cannot put passive fire seals on one schedule. You need to break them out by subject matter. Otherwise you get yourself into a pickle, and the common denominator has got to be the wall system, if that makes sense. And obviously you've got your digital record and inspections. Lots of other things that sit behind this that you may have already seen from us, but to put it into like a bit more of a flow around a passive fire knowledge sort of process, which is that, back to the top, that's what it kind of looks like in practice. I'm going to switch that back off and revert to the screen and let the questioning begin. Did that make sense, everyone? Or has everyone been a bit dumb? Everyone's a bit like, whoa.
No, I think that was it was a whirlwind, but actually it clearly done a huge amount of kind of work on that. And I mean, the diagrammatic element is from a visual kind of person like myself, that really helps just to
Makes it a bit easier,
understand
doesn't it?
something quite complicated. I guess the question that I would have at the moment from an architectural, because we're going through at the moment trying to generate our content library for architectural speaking wall types,
Yeah.
for example, and door types, and in order to reduce the number, I think for all of us, we just want to reduce the glossaries or the number of glossaries or the number of things
Yeah.
in a glossary, for example. So what I can think immediately here is that as I say, that coordination, more detailed review between the M&E services, for example, the fire concern and architectural layouts, because typically I would say at the moment we do the layouts and then the M&E would overlay their design onto the scheme.
Yeah.
But I'm 100% sure that no M&E has ever looked through our wall glossaries and gone, actually, hold on a minute. We've looked at the wall type that you're proposing between, the party walls or shaft and whatever, and our proposed ductwork is not going to work in that. We don't think it's going to work. Now, I would like to understand whether in practice, what is currently happening at the moment, because obviously on all this, I don't know if this level of scrutinizing actually is happening, or maybe it is. I've just not been lucky enough to kind of witness it.
No.
And how is it actually a case of, as I say, being more onerous with the coordination requirement to go, actually, M&E fire consultants, can you please, you're going to have to check the wall build-ups as well that we propose to meet the fire and acoustics that we may need against the review that you've done in terms of the passive fire. Is that a fair kind of question?
Yeah, I think what it is, what I'm seeing from various different things is that if you imagine this, right, is that just take this one example. We've had this on a job where we've had a riser with ventilation duct going all the way up. Well, the outturn onto the floor, the distance between that wall and that duct is 90 millimeters. And in 90 millimeters of space, you can put a shaft wall there, because this is about reversion to type. No disrespect to anyone, is that if you've got a shaft, the first thing the human brain will think is, I'm going to put a shaft wall in because it's a shaft, because I'm safe, because I'm only building it from one side. But it's not necessarily the right thing, because we still need to look as a tier one contractor about how the space is safe to do the work for putting the duct in anyway. And actually, I'm still going to have to put something in here in seal terms on both sides to make it work. So on one job, we had to say to the client, that 90 mil is 500 mil deficient. We can't make it work. We can't install it. You can put any wall type in there that you want. We do not physically have space to make breakaway joints, put access panels in, form seals. And actually, the job in particular didn't even have a door into the riser. We were going, we can't build this. We've got to have this has got to come out. The problem was on this job is because it had gone through a process in stage 4 and it had gone to tender, the client agreed agreement for leases, everything. And they're going, well, we can't bring it out. We're going, well, make this smaller. We can't, because unfortunately we've got agreement for leases in relation to volumetric. We can't make the volumes any smaller. I can't put that there. So basically the whole job's had to go right back to stage 2 and be replanned. It just doesn't work. If these kind of things aren't considered in this kind of this is unfortunately is just the reality of it. What you find is that if it comes up with the trades later on, the trades can't fix it because they're governed by getting seals installed correctly, doing breakaway joints, and we've got a Building Safety Act coming in where the HSE maybe not completely cottoned on to all of this yet because they may not have the reasonable skill that understands all the stuff around this, but they're going to learn pretty quickly when the first few things go wrong. You will never make that job work. So get in at the end of Gateway 1 before it goes to planning, where you've got some real good rule sets around things like this diagrammatically about how things fit, is in everyone's benefit to go out to a client and say, well, this stuff exists in the market. You can clearly see, this will end up in other documents that have been circulated through Bs and things, that this is actually what you need to actually install these things correctly and safely and actually make the seals work.
Yeah.
But this isn't knowledge that, and this is the absolute truth. If you look at it from various eyes, and this is it's always funny to hear this. So I do this in the right context, and this is not a blame thing because I feel sorry for everyone at the moment, right? Is that, the tier one contractors, we may be looking at the architects going, they ain't cutting the mustard. This isn't an architectural issue. This is a combination of installation, compatibility with wall types, and procurement, because the MEP consultant doesn't want to choose these. You don't want to set these because you're being told the best value comes from the tier one later on when they select supply chain. So that's a direct conflict. Doesn't work, does it? That's the whole behavioural thing of the construction industry. The fact is that if we can get to the end of Gateway 1 where there's lots of good workbooks available for architects and building services consultants to work to make this selection process easier. So there's a workbook for that, a workbook for that, a workbook for that. But when you go through the same sort of diagrammatic sort of flow that you get to the end and you go, well, I know the wall type that I've got, and I know the thickness because I've now determined this against all of these. Then you know the ultimate wall thickness that you need and the type that you need. And you're 99% sure that it's all going to fit in future. You even know what the the wall deflection requirement is to get these things right as well, because that's one of the ones that's been causing problems. It's then known it's going to make people's lives a lot easier, a bit easier to talk to clients about it. Does that make sense? That's the whole aim of getting this done, is to give everyone the support to go through it with clients a bit easier.
Yeah, and I think that builds on again one of the comments that Jared made about this zonal design state, because it's a zonal thing, isn't it? Vertical, horizontal, which we should be doing already. And I know we joke about Emily always Emily always wanting more riser space, but maybe they're true. And it's that kind of level of accuracy is what we need at this stage, coming from, as I say, the workbooks or rules of thumb. So that, as you say, the flexibility is there for the specific product maybe later, but at least the installation, and you're not narrowing yourself down by squeezing everything too early. That actually you don't have the chance of procuring something more cost economical, etc. later down the line, because you squeezed yourself in the design. You have to go down a bespoke route every time or something.
Yeah, there's limitations on bespoke. I'm doing the same thing at the moment for this on steel beams, because you can't put steels in compartment lines and put products through them. There's no method of doing it. I'm trying to get that method of how you get yourself out of the out of that dodge when it all goes wrong into an order in the same sort of shape as this. But I think to have that in that order, I think is it Richard? Is it? That's Richard.
Sorry, no, it's me. I was just going to say something. Can you hear me?
No, because I could hear some in the background being really. I think it was Richard. Yeah, you're going, Paul. Go on, mate. Say it. What do you want to
I think that's the whole point, and I think you've definitely shown it very well, Paul. The key point is that if you close everything down, there's not going to be a solution, however much you want one. And I think that's the situation that we're in now, because somebody just solved it in the past and just put it all in, and now they can't do that because they can't generate the evidence to say that it's all right.
And you won't get assessments done either. They just won't do them because there's not enough data to do it. I mean, look, if you look at all of this, is just dampers. I'm going to do, and just to say, just for your benefit, Paul, is all the stuff that I do send it to Paul for verification as well. And look, this isn't bringing you into the blame game, Paul. Is that I rely on you, Paul, for a lot of your skilled knowledge on these subjects as well, to make sure you're keeping me honest. So I do try to get as many people to look at these things as I can. And all this stuff will come out. I've got another meeting in the PFKG end of this month where we're going to try and get this fully ratified, so we're all aligned. Then we're going to bring other people into it, because the bit I really need the help on is that if you imagine this is my biggest thing, is that if you go to a manufacturer, so manufacturers need to come on board with this, is that they give you a Revit file which has got a load of information.
Oh, Paul, we lost you there. Hello, Paul. Hello, Paul. Sorry, Paul, we lost you there for a minute or so. Still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. You're back online.
Yeah, so I'll take the headphones out. If you imagine, it's like if we get the manufacturers fully on board as well, you'll end up with that information that's there, which is all that's above in a Revit file, and then in a tick sheet at the front, which will basically make you go through that process of selection in this order. And that's gonna help drive it as well. That's where the BIM part's quite important, because it's got to be held in Revit, a lot of this as well. And that's all for golden thread and for changing later on. Because this is essentially, when you think about it, if you wanted to do golden thread for a fire damp in one location in the building, this is all it is, isn't it? You've gone for the whole process of type, space, risk, of everything of it to get to that point of selecting the appropriate product for the appropriate circumstance of where you want to use it. That's what we try to do and make it diagrammatically, essentially.
That's great. Well, I mean, one of the things that may help Paul is, as I said, with from an architectural point of view, we're going through this sort of wall type filtering process for DMA-led projects, trying to minimize the number of types that we have of walls, whether it's dry lining at the moment is what we're focusing on. Because ideally it'll be dry lining or let's say RC, some block work in unusual, so in sort of a plant room kind of scenarios. So maybe something that once you've kind of looked at this, I could share what the team, our team are doing. Just say, well, here's our typical glossary of wall types that which achieve the acoustic, fire, but also maybe in other scenarios like in kitchens and bathrooms. Because not a huge amount, to be honest, in a flat, for example, in an apartment, different types. I think there's like 3 wall types. You have variations on that because of the type of board and the finish. But it would be useful to kind of say, well, actually, the wall type thicknesses that we're getting are here. How does that align to the testing? Because, you know, you got 122, 140, but actually they're quite thick walls, relatively speaking, in terms of our internal one. So I'm happy to kind of share that when the time is right, because like I said, we're doing it at the moment. So if your wall types don't match up with the certified.
These Excels are available at the moment anyway because they've been sent out. If you need, I'll send them back out to you. And it's no drama at all. They're out there anyway. But
I just find it easy to kind of we'll kind of share our glossary, and then you can say, well, actually, hold on, most of the test data is done on walls which are thicker, so there's some inherent misalignment between, say, BG Whitebook or Knauf and the testing that's been done in dampers, for example.
The hard thing is, I mean, we said this before, is that this is where I've used these for actually so you can look at all the things. So when you do the initial check on site, it's all installed correctly. Then for future maintenance, so you sit there and you go, well, we looked at Action Air dampers and they use 1 layer of Pactrus ball. We looked at some other Action Air ones and they had 2 layers of aperture framing. This is what you have to follow. Some of the Mandic and Trucks kit on the market doesn't have any aperture framing because you're filling it with gypsum plaster. These things are actually a kit that's built and formed into the wall. You know, that comes specifically for the manufacturer. Sand, cement, cavity systems, you know, cleats built into the wall. So all of these things have some variances. So you have to compare that as a system approach with the whole wall, and actually how many holes can you have in the wall before it can't house anymore.
Yeah, the other issue with that is that you've got to get your coordination if you're building the wall correct, because if you buy that one, you have to have the damper installed before the wall goes up, and if you buy the other one, you've got to have the wall there before you put the damper in. So you've got to be looking at your site coordination quite clearly.
Interesting. I've just seen a couple of other things. I think Sharon, you made a comment, and Joe, you sent a link. If you want to just add to that.
Yeah, let me get off of this screen quickly. Hold on.
Yeah, well, it just kind of rang a bell really in terms of you were saying that you're developing your library of wall types. We've been going through exactly the same exercise, kind of driven by sustainability more than anything else, actually, and making sure that they are tested products. We haven't quite managed to boil it down to 3 wall types, though. I'm impressed by that. We've actually
as I said, just there's internal apartments. Not when you take all the other, when they take all the party walls and everything else, it just explodes. Yeah, in terms of just purely dealing with sort of fire and acoustics. But then when you put the wall types, or the board types, it kind of messes things up a bit. As you're trying to make things simple, things always want to get more complicated, don't they?
Exactly. So the link that I just put in the chat was to Knauf's Revit plugin. So this is something that I haven't used. I haven't actually played with it, but I saw it when I was developing our own content. But I don't know if that actually asks the same kind of questions that been discussing today. I suspect it doesn't. But it's interesting that is developed, because it's getting so complicated, isn't it? That this has to be solved by programming and databases rather than us mere mortals, I think.
What we found, Joe, right? This isn't about business artwork. This is about seeing everybody else's problems. You know, because you become a bit of an agony aunt, unfortunately, in this world. Everyone comes to you with the dirty laundry. Is that everyone kind of thought initially that they had a builder's work issue, and it's not a builder's work issue that exists. And I think you kind of said it at the start. You'd say at the start, Andrew, is that it's a procurement issue. That's the biggest problem, because we're doing things in isolation, not as a system approach. So you're seeing it show its face in the builder's work problem, where everyone goes, oh, you know, the damper doesn't work, oh, they've selected the wrong kit. And actually you go, well, it's a door, it's a wall, it's a flue, it's a damper, it's a smoke control, it's a glass panel, and it's all got a minimum thickness requirement and a type. And there's obviously the weight of it and the wall type, but you've got to house it all in. And I think if you get to the point where you go to actually dampers generally, if you go 2 mil thick, you're probably not going to go wrong. If you go to glass panels in walls, it might be, do you know what? You're not going to go wrong on a wall smaller than 138 mil thick, whatever, you know, 140 mil thick, 150. Then you're already getting down to the point when you're drawing walls out initially, you know that they're always symmetrical. You access them from both sides. You allow the access inside to install them both ways. And things like shaft walls reserved for a shaft where there's nothing going through it, and that's it. That kind of removes that issue, because I think what's happened is shaft walls just been used. No one's fault. Everyone's just gone put it everywhere because it's just easier to install from one side. It's safe, it's tested, but nothing goes through it. It's this issue I've got with kind of steel beams, is that steel beams, the structural engineer wants to put them at the line level with the risers, but there's no test method to put anything through them. And I've started working out with Cineat and Promat how you can look at a method for testing stuff through it. And honestly, it's going to take me weeks and weeks and weeks to get it into a document like portrayed like that, where you say, well, this is everything you'd need to go through to, you aren't going to get it classified either because there's no test standard to prove it's safe in all conditions, because you've got a thickness that way, you've got a type of beam, you've got a depth that way, you've got a span, then you've got the layers of boarding, the internal boarding, the type of seal, the type of kit you're going to put through it. It just, so I always say people keep steel beams off of compartment lines at risers, because you ain't going through them, you're going to go under them. That's one of the big things.
And I think the other thing that I've noted is it's quite easy, I guess, to get too overwhelmed, because actually maybe risers and shafts are, relatively speaking, quite a minor percentage of the build, very important. And actually all the other ones, partitions, bedrooms, bathrooms, if you're talking residential, are generally accessible by both sides and are symmetrical, as you say, Paul. So I think yeah, shouldn't get too kind of overwhelmed, but also it's quite good because these are specific instances within a building floor plate that there's a bit of additional attention is needed, time, but it's not like every single area, generally speaking. I think that's true to say. So on one hand, yes, it seems like quite a tricky area, but luckily there's only a small percentage of them. So that gives me, and that's why when we're looking at the wall types, I was speaking to the internal team. Okay, look, it may look like there's a huge amount of all types, but to deal with 80% of a floor plate, we only need a couple. So let's not kind of get too overwhelmed at the same time. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to work out with the team internally here. Sharon, sorry. Oh, I think Sharon, you just exactly mentioned that thing on the chat. 20% of the air is giving 80% of problems. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a bit more. Hello, Sharon. You're on mute if you're saying something. No, maybe busy. No. Oh, okay, fine. Sorry, not a problem. But yeah, thank you for the input. I don't know if anyone else got any thoughts or comments.
The big thing for me was that did everyone kind of agree that how the flow, when you look at it in that context, how it kind of flows, and it's just so you can see it from all the other inputs, that I'm trying to get to this point where I've got a pacifier code. Like, if you've never seen CPC Code M, it's always worth having a look at it. Even though it's commissioning, it's not anything that maybe architectural deals with. If you look at the principle of how you manage commissioning, it's no different to really how you manage passive fire cradle to grave. Does it make sense? You've got to have, like, my view is you've got to have the same approach what CPC's done, is you have a passive fire knowledge code that kind of, and I don't know if it's the right word to use for it, but it sets out how you do like RACI from cradle to grave and how people should input to that thing, because it's about specialist knowledge holders. It's also about supply chain to a degree, because once you've got the key classification information, you can go to a manufacturer, whether it's a Mandic or Trox and an Action Advanced or whatever, and you can go, can I have one of these? And they can give it to you. If you go to them and ask for an FD, I think Paul attested this, what you get is a bit of a gamble. You like gambling, it's going to be appropriate for where it's going. Because all the other parameters aren't considered, if that makes sense. So it's
I
just,
think the one of the things I guess from an M&E point of view is their experience. I guess this is the idea of trying to get them on board earlier, especially with the Gateway 2 requirement, is an M&E subcontractor with a designer who are actually working together with their knowledge of install, commissioning and maintenance. Now, obviously, a lot of consultants don't have maintenance or installation experience, but you'd hope that if a subcontractor is appointing the designer, they would actually review the design and say, well, look, we can't actually build that in that sequence, or that's not how we would do it. I haven't really seen that happen in projects that I worked on, but in an ideal world, that would be the best way, so that the maintenance elements of it, the installation elements of it, are picked up in the comment in the design and fed back to the architectural structural team. Say we do need more space in this riser because of X, Y, and Z, and if it's required, then obviously we'll align. That's what I'm hoping things might change to. But so every time I see a M&E subcontractor point a consultant early, which is pretty rare, I hope that the maintenance element and the installation is reviewed. But unfortunately, I don't think that's happening.
No, I don't think it is, Ed. I think this is why. I've had two, and sort of bring this back up again. I don't mind a bit of criticism, right? Because it's healthy to have it. Is that some people thought I think I went too far. Some people have gone, I've got it just about right. Some people have gone, well, what about tolerances? You know, the bottom line is to get to a point where you've got a graphical where you go, before you go to a manufacturer and ask for a product, that's the minimum. Along with that, you need to go to them with and say, can I have one of these?
Yeah,
And
makes sense to me. Makes sense to me.
That's basically what you need. But that's why this sends the powerful message that you've gone through all of that. The only bit is that we need to make sure, and this all comes down to say relative competence, is that fire curtains are a nightmare, because the classification. This is where I'm not having a go at anyone. I'm just looking at this in what I'm experiencing here, is that a fire curtain isn't REI, and I've seen that 100 times now. It could be R, it could be W, it can be EW, it can be S. Depends the function for which it's fulfilling, which affects the product. And I will get one of these done for fire curtains as well, but the classification information will be different. I need to add all of that into it. But some of these parameters will be the same, like the wall types will be the same. But there'll be add-ons here with C16 timbers and things I need to insert. So I need to get to a method where whatever product that's going into it, out of the general, say 8, maybe 7 or 8 that go into it, there's a method of getting to how they work classification wise on a common denominator on thickness and type, because that's going to remove 99% of the problem. The fact is, whatever you install, whether it's a damper, a duct, a flue, even a door, you still need this level of access both sides to get that product installed safely. You can't get away from it. So that kind of sets the scene for ducts and dampers and things in enclosed risers, what actually space you really need to get it right, because I can't see how else you're going to do it. And I've seen these things installed in spaces less than that before, but you go back and you look at them, they're not installed very well. They're not probably done properly. Things are missing. These things aren't installed correctly. That you always find problems with them, especially when you look at what's going on with the affected premises. These things are coming back out the woodwork. People are making a cottage industry of it. It's very easy to do it. So that kind of stuff. This will come out, and you'll get copies of it in the next couple of weeks once I've gone through it with the PFKG. You'll see more of this stuff getting launched, and I think my biggest thing was to make sure you guys were really aware of it, because this is about BIM4Housing. It's about PFKG, and it's about everyone getting us all getting better collectively, and just hopefully it's going to help you guys on fault. But the biggest one is doors to me, Andrew, because you've got security and you've got DocM on it. This is the hardest one, because this isn't about classification. It's about pipework material. It's about corrosive effects as well. This
No,
is
that's great. Makes
Do
sense.
you know what I mean? So you can kind of, there's all different key propagators into this. If you look at pipe work, you know, not to sort of bog this down, is that you can't put stainless steel through a wall with a H&V pipe sleeve made of rock wool, especially if it's a cold temperature, because the rock wool and the stainless steel will probably react. You know, you get chlorites, it'll attack the pipe work.
That makes sense.
Do you know what I mean? So it's like you know CPCV pipes with non-graphite max or graphite massives, whatever they are, and causing the pipe work to fail. It's all these kind of things that need to be considered to get that whole size right. And this isn't what I'm kind of saying. This isn't an architectural issue, though. Certain people are putting it on it, and it's not necessarily a building services issue. I've kind of seen it is that whoever's going to take ownership of the contract needs to make sure the pencil's sharp and this stuff's all considered, and you support the design team, the fire engineers to get it right, because there's not one knowledge holder. There's individual ones, and this is why it's good because you've got mixtures of all those people in these groups. So it's good to sort of
No,
visualize.
fantastic.
I'm going to shut up now. All right.
No, fine. I had a hand up from Sharon. Sorry, Sharon, you had a hand up.
Sharon?
Hi. No, I don't actually know if you'll be able to hear me because I've got a really bad signal. Welcome to the west coast of Scotland. But
We can hear you.
I just wanted to say thank you, because this is like a Christmas present for me. I had a conversation yesterday with someone saying that they still don't know anything about passive fire protection. They still don't know about service penetrations and sealing them. And that's a fit out contractor, quite a large organisation, FM. So listening to this, having an image of a person inside a riser and outside a riser is just, it just feels as if I'm in a conversation with like-minded people for a change, instead of being in a room harping. You know, I'm like the harbinger of doom every time I go into a building site, because I just say I can't do that, and everyone says, you know, like, don't invite her back. So I just wanted to say thank you so much. No, I know I'm the harbinger of doom, but and the sprinkler pipe thing that you've just mentioned, allegedly the mastic having an issue, as opposed to the bracketry being too tight and the running against the block work, etc., etc. I mean, honestly, I had to intervene just to say the imagery that's been showing, the evidence of how complicated things are, and the way that people, you know, it's almost like people are throwing buildings up and it's actually a science, and this is going to cut through all the bullshit and just make people sit up and think it's not as straightforward. So thank you.
And Sharon, that is the only way we could kind of work out how to do it, was actually to put things into imagery purposes. It's a bit like the one I am working on at the moment is the steel beam one. I've got to transfer these images into the same thing, because it's super complex to get it right. And without those images, you can't, as you say, you can't cut through the bullshit, because, you know, if you imagine it from a contractor's perspective, and this is why that, you know, we brought out first of all in the contracting group with Martin and the guys there, is that when you actually think about it, is that once you get to that situation where that's 100 mil, that's 50, and there's an AFL involved, agreement for lease, where you can't make the riser bigger, straight away that contractor reverts the type. So does the design team, to be frank, and so does the client, and it becomes hard hats on in the trench, all fighting each other. But the fact is, someone just needed to bite the bullet and make it big and deal with the contractual consequences. Then it's done. Should be simple, but it's not, because everyone starts fighting about it. So, yeah, thanks a lot, Sharon.
Thanks, Sharon. Mike, I know you had put a little comment on the chat as well. I don't know if you want to expand on that, Mike Smith.
Yeah, hello. Hope you can all hear me. Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is a really, really good conversation, and if you took this topic about fire dampers and applied it to any other element within the building, it's a very, very similar conversation. I think the key message with this is we always come across people who have wonderful skill sets and knowledge about a specific element, and it's about having those right and open conversations at the right time. I'm always a little bit nervous of manufacturer-led design tools, so like the NAF tool and things like that. I think they serve a purpose, but I always feel that there's a step ahead of that, which is more generic information about building information about projects, and that always comes from much better and open collaboration in the early stages of projects. So echo many of Paul's thoughts, and thanks. That's been really good.
No, and I think the thing when we're designing, it's just building in that kind of rules of thumb a bit more, that design book that we've spoken before about, all the zoning discussions, and making zoning not just oh, it's always 300, so we'll do it 300. It's not just 300, it's 300 or 350 because of X, Y, and Z decisions, or actually this flowchart approach that you've taken to get to a zonal decision. They may not be 100% right, but there's actually a logic and, as I said, a thread to how you got to that zone. So if you apply that vertically, horizontally, to ceilings, to floor build-ups, etc., then that's going to help minimize issues down the line. You can, I'm sure you can make it bespoke and slim it, but always start with the real tolerance on each other side first, rather than kind of squeezing ourselves first and then really struggling later on. But I don't know if anyone else has anything else, but otherwise, I thought that was really really interesting. Don't know if anyone else got any comments they would like to add. Yeah. If not, shall we wrap it up there? That's been fantastic. Paul, thank you very much for that. And Richard, I guess when you caught up with George, maybe we can have another small catch up just about the questions that we raised and how that could be, pushed out to the wider teams. Still there, Richard? You're on mute. I assume he's still there somewhere. But
probably on another call, mate. That's the issue, isn't it?
No, exactly. Well, look, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Paul, and Paul as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. I say, well, once I've gone for the next PFPG meeting, we've got this stuff will become a resource that's available. It will be there.
Fantastic. No, great start to your new year. Thank you.
No problems. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.